This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL COVEL. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. Taking a little ride down to Austin, Texas today, at least a ride on the podcast, to get into a little venture capital with my two guests today, two guys that have been around for a long time, Amos Schwartzfarb and Trevor Boehm. We get into their book today, Levers, the Framework for Building Repeatability into Your Business. I got to tell you, this is one of those subjects that I wish that I thought about more when I was younger. Don't get me wrong, I can't complain about a damn thing. I've done quite well. But the idea of looking at your business model in terms of repeatability, delivering something, a service, a product that your customers need ongoing, and you can be that valuable lever to them to give them an advantage, to give them something they need. The repeatability aspect is mission critical. I mean, it's the best way to judge if your business is going to really have staying power. What I like about where Amos and Trevor go today, their thinking, their mentality is not just for a billion-dollar company. It's for the solo startup guy. It's for anyone. A great perspective, the right way to think with your startup. And let's face it, if you are a business owner, if you want to start a business, everyone is a startup at some point in time. Without any further delay today, let's jump right into my conversation with Amos Schwartzfarb and Trevor Boehm and dive into a little bit of the lever, however you want to say it. It's damn important. This podcast has become my main thing in many ways, but I write these investing books, and one of the investors I follow does a strategy that I don't, but he's pretty good at mapping out fundamentally where U.S. stocks are comparatively over the decades. And in the last month, by all the measures that he uses, and I think you guys have a history that goes back to the dot-com era, so by all the measures he uses, he says, we have now reached all-time extended highs, bubblicious, whatever you want to call it. I don't know what your feeling is about that. I'm not trying to get investing insights here necessarily, but do you guys feel like in the VC space, the startup space, do things feel frothy?
The last 24 months, and really much longer than that, have been so interesting to watch and unfold. And just for a little context for you, Michael, when we had that short but very, very deep dip, about a year ago, a little bit more in the market, we felt it in the funding world, in the early stage VC world in particular too, rounds that were committed not happening, the 23rd hour. This is was my third down cycle as an adult and a professional. So I felt like, okay, there'll be a trough and then it'll bounce back. The thing that, I'm going to get to my version of your answer, but the thing that surprised me that I'm still trying to reconcile is living through the dot-com bust in 99, 2000, living through what happened in 2005, 2006, 2007. Did we just see the exact same thing happen in a shortened time period simply because the world moves much faster? Or was that not the dip that was coming? So I think we're a little bit in unprecedented times. So for someone to say we're at a frothy bubble, I don't know that there's the right data to say it. And at the same time, it's ridiculous to me, the valuations that have been happening and the pace of funding relative to even 18 months ago when I thought it was frothy. And I think that the answer is maybe less, I wouldn't use the word frothy, and more, there is just such a tremendous amount of people investing in the early stage space that there's a lot of new early stage fund managers and there's just a lot of money. So maybe we're saying the same thing differently. There's so much competition for good deals and even for mediocre deals because there's just so much money that needs to be put to work. And I think everyone is too strong a word, but having rebounded quickly from what we've just been through and wanting to be optimistic about the future, staying bullish on it.
When you use the phrase, the need to put money to work, and we're not really getting into where we're going to go in our conversation as much yet, but if you use that phrase, putting money to work, it's kind of an interesting phrase because it feels like this money has to be put to work, whether or not there are enough good ideas. Is that a fair assessment?
It is. We can go off on a wild tangent on many of the things broken in the venture capital world, but you just named one of them, which is one of the dirty secrets about venture capital is that most venture capitalists don't actually make money investing. They make their money from fees because it's very hard to be successful as an early stage investor. When you have a base of LPs that they've given you money to go invest in startups, for example, if you're not investing, you're not pulling your fees down. And if you're not pulling your fees down, you're not paying your mortgage and your food bills. There's an expectation when you raise a fund that over 2, 3, 4 years, whatever the fund says, you're going to invest X amount of dollars. And if you're not doing that, you're not making money from the fees that you get paid to do that job.
Well, I'm sure a lot of people have their little bit of a light bulb moment at that. I mean, you could see it also in the world that I come from when people trade certain strategies across futures and equities and whatnot. Usually they'll get a fixed management fee and then an upside percentage of the profits. I assume it's the same in the VC space, but you seem to be implying that a lot of people aren't really looking at the upside. They just want that fee structure.
I wouldn't go so strong as to say that. I think everyone's looking at the upside, and I especially think fund managers that are in their first or second fund probably don't realize that most VCs don't actually make money from the investing. But the way that the model is structured is essentially you make no salary. Your salary is the fees that you're pulling off the money that your LPs are investing you. So if you want to pay your mortgage not out of your savings account, you have to be investing because as you invest, you're pulling the fees down.
Let me keep you at the idea that, I laid out the case. This particular individual puts all this fundamental data out and says that equities are at all-time highs. Okay, that's his view of the data he's looking at. But you guys have experience going back to the dot-com era. I do too. Can you contrast our current environment? When I think back to the dot-com era, I knew things were crazy in 98 and 99. I knew people that I really did not have an intellectual respect for were giddy or were working at some tech company yakking about all this money they were making. And I just kept thinking to myself, something's not right here. Are there any parallels that you can see with the dot-com era? I'm not saying one way or the other, we are there.
I've been doing a lot of talking, so I'll make this short and maybe Trevor can jump in because he's also on the investing side on a fund. One of the definite parallels that I'm seeing is that there is a larger number of people, with the exception of maybe a very short period in the beginning or maybe the middle of the worst part of the pandemic, there are a large number of people who are pursuing entrepreneurship as a career, thinking like, oh, if I start a company in 2 or 3 years, I'll have some big exit and my life will be changed forever. Versus, I think where Trevor and I really feel strongly are the best founders, and it's really who we wrote the book for, which are people who are building the business because they're passionate about solving a problem. And yes, of course, they want to make money, but solving the problem is their primary focus.
Let me keep you at solving the problem. Let's shift into a little more away from my tangents. It's still going to be a little bit of a tangent. I'm just going to keep weaving you through things that interest me. But I do find in the last handful of years, tech firms, a lot of the perhaps people and companies you guys know, either up close and personal from a distance. Are we going to get free speech again? Or is that permanently gone? Crickets.
Yeah. I've been not shutting up, so I've been waiting for Trevor to jump in.
Oh, man. What a question.
That's a good one, right?
Yeah.
Can I get off the podcast with this guy now?
No way. We love it, man. We love controversy.
I think we're at such an interesting moment in the tech world specifically. The pressures that exist on CEOs of tech companies, on users of tech products, on the dynamics that are at play within those. I don't know if this is a sort of a cop-out, and it's not dissimilar from what Amos said a second ago. It's really hard to predict what's going to happen over the next year or into the sort of short future. My sense is there's definitely a strong demand for new kinds of spaces that's more sort of a grassroots-driven exercise, saying, like, what do people actually just want? What kind of conversations do they want to be having? At the same time, that dynamic is happening.
But what people want is they want the ability to put something on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook that they now can't put there because there is a censorship mechanism. I'm curious, in the circles that you guys run in, is there a conversation behind the scenes where people are saying, if lots and lots of people that just have opinions, some perhaps controversial, some just different than perhaps the corporation that owns that particular megaphone, are people talking about getting us back to a free speech moment again? We had it for a long time with the internet. We never thought about you were to get censored for saying something that was controversial or even slightly controversial or not controversial. Is there a conversation behind the scenes? I'm asking you guys because I'm not in your circles. And so I'm the outsider looking in. What are VCs and what are people saying behind the scenes? It sure seems like a market opportunity to me if large segments of the population are being shut down because of a particular scientific or particular political view. The second crickets. I love this. You guys had no idea what you're going to get with me, did you?
No, this is awesome, man. I love this. I would say in my professional circles, I'm not hearing those conversations.
Why? Right now, it does feel like there's a huge censorship thing going on. So why is that not an opportunity?
I don't want to say I'm going to challenge you that there's a censorship thing going on. I think that there is a light being shined on a way that people have been brought up and saying, like, maybe we should, I'm being kind of optimistic in my answer here. We should be opening our eyes and pausing and saying, like, is it time to rethink some of the things that we've been doing forever, like you would do in any business, like you would do anything, right? There's time for an evolution. And because we're talking about billions of people versus hundreds of people or thousands of people, that it feels different, right? It takes longer. It needs a much brighter light being shined on it. And I'm speaking like for myself, I'm 48, but I'm going to call myself a kid, right? As a kid born in the Bronx and raised in New Jersey in an extremely multicultural place where my friends were from all walks of life. My family is from all walks of life. And the way we would talk to each other with love, I feel like that has to change, right? I'm relearning myself how to make sure I'm communicating in a way that's inclusive. I hear what you're saying. And
if there's one overlord behind the scenes who no one really knows who is making the decision and what the rules are, that's the part that strikes me. Okay,
is that Overlord Facebook?
I think right now there's three main places where people post information where their things are getting censored, and that's Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I mean, some highly respected, the people right now, I'm seeing some of the scientists out there that want to have very high-end intellectual debates on COVID are being shut down. And that just makes me scratch my head. That portends to a future that I don't personally like.
Yeah, I would say to the degree that that's accurate, I agree with you.
Yeah. I was curious if it's something as an opportunity that people talk about. Kind of like, look, Roger Ailes in the early 90s, and I'm not saying it's only a left or a right issue, but Roger Ailes in the early 90s looked around and said, my gosh, if I create a channel for the right-wing audience to compete with the left-wing audience at CNN, and he gave us right-wing Fox, that was a huge business opportunity. So that's what I'm driving at, are people looking at things that way.
What I see is actually the desire to push away from those platforms you mentioned, right? Those spaces you mentioned, but in probably a little bit of a different way or for different motivations or reasons. I think people are understanding the effect that those platforms have on their behavior broadly or generally. And they're realizing those effects aren't what they actually want. They're not actually creating the kinds of things for themselves that they desire. We've seen lots of that, or I've seen lots of that. People saying, what does it look like to create a space that actually creates the kind of human behavior that I desire? I wonder if some of what you're talking about is still a little bit away. I think we're still at the early days of really beginning to understand the complexities of social media, how it affects how we speak, how we think, how we decide. Maybe we'll see more of that soon.
One last part of this, and then let's jump into some levers here. Do you like to use the word levers or lever?
Lever.
I say levers. What do you say, Trevor?
I say lever, but to each his own.
Yeah.
Is there a side of you guys as an end point on my particular free speech direction? Is there a side of you that feels a little bit constrained or that you don't want to say too much about the issue even?
I would say that I feel like I'm still learning how to reconcile the issue. And so personally, this is Amos calling myself out. I feel like I'm still learning how to deal with it in a way to make sure that I'm comfortable with the words that I'm saying, regardless of anybody else. I'm trying to let myself evolve to, is there a different way to think and how do I approach it? For me, it's less about worrying what others think and more making sure that I'm evolving in a way that I'm comfortable with.
I'm going to let you guys off the hook. I want to go down the path now of like having every VC on that I possibly could have and just open with this. And then anyways,
Yeah.
Take me back in time to some genesis here. The notion of a lever or a lever. I think if people really think about the basics, it's kind of like, okay, it's like the fulcrum and kind of a board and, like a seesaw or something. How can you get on your side some power that allows you to lever yourself up, so to speak? Give me some thinking about how the word, it's the word you guys use for the title of your book, but let's go into the thinking of the word. I can think about naming books and it's always a very big deal. So why was this, in particular, this word so important to you?
We spent a long time trying to figure out what the right title was for this book. We had a clear understanding of what we were setting out to do, which was to put control in the hands of business builders everywhere. And we understood how we were doing that, which was to give them a metrics-driven understanding of the entire model of their business. And I think the word levers actually came pretty late in that process of trying to figure out, okay, what is it that we mean? Or what is it that we're trying to allow CEOs, founders, business builders to attach onto? And I don't remember, Amos, maybe you remember the exact conversation where it came up. I think in this process of sort of trying to unpack what we were doing, we started to throw around a couple of words in this direction. One was drivers, fundamental things that are driving your business. And then the other was levers. What I like particularly about levers is you have much more agency of it. With drivers, you don't necessarily have the ability to move it, but a lever is by definition something that you have the ability to move, something that's within your control.
Take me back in time. Let's walk the audience through an example. You pick the firm, whatever your heart's desire. Walk me through perhaps some of the early stage coming around to this thinking that you both have. When did it start to happen? What was the light bulb moment where you started to see this metrics-based way of doing things? Was it late 90s? When did it first start to open up for you?
For me, that moment was really, really clear. I had exited out of 2 companies already that I would arguably say weren't super metrics driven the way that we think about it today, but because of the timing, were really successful. I joined business.com, and it was a combination of a couple of things that happened there. Also, it was really the vocabulary that our CEO and our CFO used, which was, we need to become more metrics driven. We need to become more metrics driven. And then I watched what happened, and unintentionally pointing at the book, that's where the concept of W3 was born. And that is also where I learned about revenue formula from our CFO. Watching those 2 things click and what happened to our business positively in a very short amount of time, I watched it unfold in front of my eyes. And I was an executive, but I was relatively young. I think it was really clear to me that that's the answer, right? When you can figure these things out, everything starts to work positively as long as the world around you doesn't change.
You call this kind of like paraphrasing a little bit here, but 3 simple questions: your who, your what, and your why. Define those for the audience so they've got a better understanding of where we're going today.
W3 is the 3 questions that you need to answer about who you think your customer is in order to get to scale. When you think about what those questions are, they're really simple, but the hard part is actually answering them and backing it up with data. The 3 questions are who do you believe your customer is? The narrowest, most specific definition. So for example, saying, hey, I sell to the healthcare industry is way too broad. You want to say, I sell to the healthcare industry. I sell to private hospitals. There are 1,000 to 5,000 employees. They're typically in suburban areas. I'm selling to the director of IT. That director of IT has been with the hospital for less than a year, but in the industry for more than 5. They were brought on because they were trying to create efficiencies within the space. Keep going. Really, really narrow and specific.
Granular.
Yes. Yeah. So that's the who. The what, a really subtle but important thing that I think most founders miss, which is not what do you sell, but what does your customer buy? It's a difference between what you do and what you do for me. And your customers don't care what you do. They care what you do for them. The example that I'll use here is, we use Google as an example. You don't go and buy search from Google. you go and buy leads or sales or research from Google. The mechanism that they sell that is through search, but that's not what you're actually buying. And then the why is, why does it matter? Why does it matter to the business? Do you increase their revenue? Do you increase their profit? Do you create some efficiency? Like, what is the thing? And you've struck it when they can explain how they're measuring it. The sneaky why is, why does it matter to the individual buyer? Because you can line up everything perfectly with the company and you can be potentially creating a whole new revenue stream for them. But if the buyer, the individual, isn't necessarily incentivized, they may not buy because there's no reason for them to. It circles back to who. Maybe you don't have the right who.
Let's talk about testing, which is what you're getting at. This notion of optimizing across every aspect of a company, measuring. I'm 52. When I talk to guys in their 20s, entrepreneurs in their 20s, I mean, they're thinking, every entrepreneur in their 20s is measure, measure, measure. What can I test? A/B this, A/B that. Now, if you get a hold of somebody who's had a lot of success in their 50s, 60s, 70s, or 80s, completely different way of thinking. Night and day. It strikes me. I feel like Gen X is kind of in the middle ground where you can still see both sides of the coin. But the younger generation, they don't know anything but let's go test.
I want to kick off one little thing here, and I'm going to let Trevor jump in. But we very much subscribe to the let me go test. The challenge that I see with young entrepreneurs often is that they kind of know that they should be metrics driven, but they're more metrics aware. So they go test a bunch of stuff and they have a bunch of data, but they're not necessarily using it to unlock the next thing because they're not thinking in long-term chains. Let me let Trevor jump in because this is really his area of expertise more than mine.
You said it really well. How do you think in terms of long-term chains? What we see, and maybe some of what you're talking about, is this endless pursuit of measuring test after test without a real understanding of where that actually takes you, or how to even define the question to go test to begin with. We ascribe to the philosophy of actually understanding at a deeper level what it is that you're trying to unlock or what it is that you're trying to achieve with the thing you're going to go test. So why does that actually matter to the business? What is it actually going to help you do? What kind of new world is it going to help you create?
Build this out for me. I'm thinking of a young person that came to me recently, going to help me on a particular project. The way she was outlining things started to kind of drive me a little bit crazy because I felt like instead of let's get to market, so to speak, let's test, let's find some customers, let's get something we can use, she wanted to lock herself down into planning. So as you guys point out, it's that planning versus prioritization. It seems like there could be like two camps here. Maybe there's the crazy camp like me that's like jump in both feet, let's go. And then the other side is like, let's plan forever. It's a real challenge to get people to move from this planning mindset to, as you use the phrase, prioritization, taking action.
Trevor and I see a lot of companies between our work at Techstars and Saturn V and RetroCause and everything that we're doing. I often think that the challenge that you're seeing is a psychological one, which is a subconscious fear of actually putting yourself out there, fear of failing. A common thing that we see in successful entrepreneurs, specifically people that are good at starting companies, is they are not afraid to put things out there that don't go as planned. And in fact, there often isn't a plan. There's an idea and a notion that you're trying to collect data for to see if you are directionally correct and how do you course correct, because you 100% will 100% of the time from an early stage on. Usually, not always, but usually our experience is it's first-time entrepreneurs or people that have just come off a big loss and are scared to lose again. One thing that I tell my entrepreneurs, I know I'm kind of rambling on, but I love to plug my mom. I was a wrestler when I was a kid, and I was really bad for a really long time. And one day my mom asked me if I was scared to win, not if I was scared to lose, but scared to win. And I remember that moment really clearly. And I almost never lost another match again for the next 4 years after she asked me that, because it was this light bulb that went off. So I think there's just this notion in people's head, they're scared of what success might look like. It's easier to plan.
I grew up around 3 wrestlers, brothers. 2 of them were state champions. And we go down to their rec room in like 10, 11, 12 or whatever, and they just abused the hell. I was a baseball player. I really enjoyed, especially when I got later in high school, that I had some wrestling understanding because it was great. You could just go for people's knees and get them on the ground. So, forget the stand-up boxing fighting crap. Get someone on the ground.
Yeah.
Speak to your founders. You brought up the idea of the learned failure. Is it an archetype? Is there something inherent in the founders that you see that have success? I mean, are they only learning failure from failure, or are they gaining this through mentors and peers? How are people understanding that failure is part of the game?
You just stay in the game long enough, I think, is the short answer to that question, because failure is just such an inevitable part of the experience. I think the other thing that and I think I can use the we here in both how Amos and I work, is we're just constantly creating cultures in which we're talking about, we're recognizing, we're owning the failures that we experience, because it's a good, ripe ground for learning, but also just because it happens all the time. And if you're out there actually doing the work and you're coming in and out and talking about, okay, what happened this week? What happened this month? You're just going to run out of material if you're only focused on what's going well.
Okay, but if you're a first-time founder, you're coming out, they're getting money from you guys. I mean, yes, they understand the metrics that exist in the VC world. Okay, these guys are going to fund 20 companies and they're expecting 19 to fold. I don't want to be one of the 19. It's got to be tough for a founder when you're taking money from the likes of you two, because nobody wants to fail. And everyone knows that there's a lot of failure in the VC world. Psychologically, it's difficult. How do you mentor founders for the first time?
I'm going to talk about Trevor and I collectively here because we've worked together for so long. I think we do a really good job of very quickly creating a different relationship and rapport with the people that we invest in. I mean, literally in the very first conversation that I'm having with founders, with CEOs, once I recognize that I think they're potentially really strong, I say, I think Trevor does the same thing. I'm like, all right, let's talk about some of the challenges in your business. Let's go solve something together. Just share with them examples almost always of places where like I thought one thing and I was totally wrong. And had I not been open and asked for help, I would have crashed and burned. And here's why it didn't happen that way. Sometimes I wonder so much so the way that we operate that it can be a detriment, because there are unfortunately a lot of early stage investors out there that haven't been operators of early stage companies, and they just don't understand that truly to start a company, you're probably failing 100 to 500 times for every success you have on the micro and macro level.
You're making the case for all those potential angel investors out there. They think they're going to get their home run and be Peter Thiel on his Facebook investment on the first try. Think again.
When people come to me and ask me for advice on how to angel invest, I usually say don't. You have to think of it as charity. You really, really have to think of it. I'm doing this because I want to help this entrepreneur try to realize his dream, not because I'm actually going to make any money from it. And if you do it enough, the numbers are eventually going to fall in your favor. But if you're doing it 1, 2, 5, even 10 times, the chances are you're never going to see your money again.
Paint a picture for me. It's been a decade since I've been to Austin. I was there a bunch in the first, 2000 to 2010, but it's been a decade. What is driving the Austin scene, so to speak? Contrast it to Silicon Valley. So many people have come from Silicon Valley to Austin. Contrast the size, the scale and size of the two areas, the Valley and Austin.
This might be a fun one for both me and Trevor to try to answer a little bit, because I'm not from Texas and Trevor is and grew up in and around near Austin. I'm a New Yorker who lived in the Bay Area in the late 90s, moved to LA in the 2000s when there was a bunch of companies booming out of there. And I've been similar to you. I started going to Austin in 2000 after we opened up an office there for a company I was a part of, but I didn't move there until 2008. But I've been there a long time now. So I would say, one, we can compare and contrast. I think when we talk about it locally in Austin, I think it's healthier not to. We're on our own path in Austin. We are not like San Francisco in the 90s or 80s. We might be like San Francisco in the 1930s, but not like in our lifetime. We're not like LA, certainly, because the money there comes from somewhere completely different. We're definitely not like New York. I think one of the things that strikes me, I'm still trying to validate how true this is, but that I've realized lately is in the lifetime of most people today, we've never seen a city emerge. We've heard about cities emerging like New York, Chicago, Boston, LA, San Francisco, but we haven't lived through it. And so I think in a lot of ways, we're experiencing in Austin when people say recently, oh, what's going on? Everyone's moving to Austin. Well, I heard that in 2008. The joke when I moved here from California in 2008 was I'm closing the gate behind me. And when I started coming here in 2000, it was the same thing. People were like, please don't move here. We want our small city to stay a small city. And then there was the contingent of, please move here. We want to continue to grow our city. But it's growing at such a massive, rapid pace. And there's a lot of things, and I'm going to stop in 1 second. But I think one thing that I have contrast from every city I've ever been in is how sincerely open and friendly and collaborative most people are. If you're new to the city, people aren't going to be competitive with you. If you started a company, very sincerely, it's the South. They're friendly. They want to help. They want to welcome you to their city. They want you to enjoy it. They want you to be a part of it. That has not gone away in the 21 years that I've been coming to this city. It's only getting more and more, because when someone comes in without that mentality, they don't do very well for very long.
You mentioned the South, and I split the difference. Mother from the South, father from the North. But I've got a nephew who's a pretty good athlete, and he's looking at schools all around. And all I just keep telling him is, go to the South. People are nicer. It's true. I mean, I remember going around my grandmother in Southern Virginia, and it was like this sweet, syrupy, everyone's just sweet, black or white. It didn't make a difference. Everyone was just sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to love that Southern friendliness that it can sometimes come back and bite you. You don't always know what people really think about you, but you're certainly a lot more pleasant as you open doors, as you're just getting to know people.
You guys go into your work, you go into your book, Levers, you go into this whole framework, this whole ground up way to think. But the word that really strikes me is repeatability, because everybody can pull up apple.com and just start to imagine, my gosh, how much fun it must be to run the repeatability of that business. I mean, it's just repeatability on steroids. And I think a lot of people might think, well, gosh, and I might be one of them, repeatability is a lot tougher than it looks. I mean, it really does take some ground up thinking to put yourself in a position to have repeat clients, because there's many paths that we can go down as entrepreneurs where we can make money, but we might leave out the repeatability.
Yeah, repeatability is really the holy grail for people, for founders who are really in the thick of it when they're launching their companies and trying to grow something from the ground up. And I say that because it's just chaos at the early stages. To your point, there are ways to make money that don't require you to have a sense of repeatability in your business. There are not a lot of ways to keep sane without having a sense of repeatability and to really grow what you're doing in a methodical way. I think about repeatability as a really simply, if I do this, then this will happen. And how do I understand the structure, the system by which that thing does happen so that I can do it over and over and over again? I think sometimes a pushback that we can hear when we talk about this idea of repeatability is it can start to feel to some people like we're asking them to narrow or to limit what they're doing, overly prescribe or overly focus on a particular customer or in a particular direction. And it's actually not that at all. What we're actually saying is, let's develop enough muscle memory in a given direction, a very narrowly focused direction at first, so that we can actually put that direction in a sense of autopilot. And then we can figure out how to take that individual focus, that thing that's going well, that thing that's actually working, and then build on it and expand out from there, which is way easier.
Give the audience an example company or an example idea where they can picture that.
Where the company has some great repeatability in what they do. I can give you example companies, and as I do, what I'll say is, if you think about a company that understands, like most public companies have repeatability in their business, meaning that they understand their financial model. When they look at it, that all things that they understand and control, they will know, they can literally predict the future in every aspect or most of the aspects of their models. That's why when they're projecting out for the next quarter's earnings call, they're saying like, here's what we're going to do. And when they miss their earnings call, or if they hit their earnings call, or if they exceed their earnings call, they can literally point to the things that were repeatable, that were different than what they had expected and why. This is the mature companies that are truly metrics driven. Whereas an earlier stage company, you're trying to get to that. You're trying to say like, okay, there's chaos in my model. What is the one thing that I know I can count on? And how do I turn that one thing to two things? And how do I turn that two things to three things? Specific company example.
We're both invested in the early stages, right? So they're in the thick of this right now. It's a company called Homebuyer, a mortgage company for first-time home buyers. And they're not just a mortgage company for first-time home buyers. They're a mortgage company for first-time home buyers who have salaried income and who are focused on, have some money to put into a down payment for a pretty conventional loan. And their focus is on how do we serve that customer very narrowly, 100% of the time, extremely efficiently. This is actually a great example because the mortgage market is the exact opposite of this. If you look at the mortgage industry as a whole, it is by definition fragmented. Even the biggest online players that are sort of attempting to consolidate the market, they're still serving every possible customer that comes to them. They're still doing refinances. They're still doing edge case different loans. And what that means is it requires people and it requires recreating the process over and over again. But if instead you start to narrow down your focus as homebuyers doing and saying, okay, we're going to serve this customer and we're going to serve them super well, it allows them to build a sense of repeatability and efficiency into that model, both in how they find that customer, but also how they service them.
What's interesting about that example, I can think that, okay, you guys have got an army of startup founders in front of you, and they all want to create the next, you name it, the next star, the next Facebook, et cetera. But they're not going to. Law of large numbers. I mean, it's not going to happen. There's a few massive winners, and everyone's not going to get a chance to create the next Facebook. There's probably only going to be one in our lifetime, perhaps. But how do you counsel people to temper their ambitions? Because what you just described is a narrow focus. I'm sure there's plenty of money to be made in the particular mortgage company that you just described, but it's capped out to some degree. You're never going to put an iPhone in everyone's hand with that particular business. So how do you counsel people that, have got ambition out the wazoo, but okay, the startup they're going after has got a ceiling, so to speak?
I think one of the things that Trevor and I are a little bit different in the way when we invest in companies is that our expectation is that they won't be the next Facebook. Our models are created such that they don't have to be the next Facebook for everybody to make money and be successful. So it starts with that, right? It starts with us not being as important. It's a huge reason why we wrote this book, because we wanted to impact a greater number of founders with the thinking that the more important thing is building a meaningful business that creates a value where everybody walks away feeling that they're getting the value that they expected. And that includes the company making money, the buyer, et cetera. Answer your question directly, the way that we counsel it is we say it up front, which is our expectation is you won't be $1 billion company, but if the potential is there and you follow the process, and I'm going to get to your answer around specificity in a minute, and you follow the process, you will be able to realize the entirety potential of what you could realize in a methodical way. We use homebuyer again as the example. They are starting at a very narrow place. By the way, that narrow place is still a really big market, but they're starting at a very narrow place. And what we say is, this isn't where you end. This is where you start. When you have repeatability in this type of customer, when you truly know what's going on, when you can list the entirety of that customer attribute list and you nail it, that is when you can start to say, okay, how do I go wider? How do I expand my market? How do I one day capture everybody? So it could be that homebuyer's vision is to service every single home buyer ever in the future. That future may be 15 or 20 or 25 years away, which is another thing that how we advise our companies, which is play the long game. This is going to be a long time. And if you're not in it, expecting to be in it for a long time, walk away. But expect you're going to be in it for 10 or more years. You're going to start narrow. And as you learn, you can go wider and wider. And one day you'll realize your entire addressable market. Right now, you're trying to figure out, is there a market that will buy you all the time?
I look at investors, I look at funds, hedge funds and whatnot out there. And I see the same thing with somebody like Warren Buffett. Oh, I want to be the next Warren Buffett. No, it's not going to happen. It's a math problem. You're not going to get there, right? It's tough to hear that, though. It makes us human. And then it makes us realize there's something called luck and there's something called skill. Everyone's not going to be Buffett. Everyone's not going to be Gates. It's not going to happen.
I totally agree. And I think the message that I am interested in focusing on isn't, therefore, you should constrain your ambition, which maybe is appropriate, maybe isn't. It's actually, the message should be, okay, in an environment in which there are a series of outcomes, some of which are infinitesimally small in their likelihood, how do I de-risk what is most critical in the business at the beginning so that I can make sure that my outcome is good no matter what? so they have the ability to create a good outcome for myself as I define it.
Let's talk about mentors, whether they're up close and personal mentors for you both, or it was distance. How did you get this perspective? Who smashed all this information into your skulls and got you going down the right path?
I'm giggling because I think I won't speak for Trevor here entirely, but I'll say for me, I'm not sure I really understood or valued the notion of a mentor for a long time, even though when I look back, I had a lot. And I had people that believed in me that maybe I didn't realize they believed in me until I looked backwards. But really, for me, Trevor and I both worked at Techstars, and our model is a mentorship-driven model, which means that we have literally thousands and thousands of people around the world who have raised their hand and said, I want to help early stage companies, and I don't expect anything in return. To some degree, they've become like professional mentors, not professional that they get paid because they don't, but professional in that they have realized that their payment is through feeling like they're making a positive impact on up and coming people, maybe because they had a mentor, maybe because they didn't have a mentor. But being around this for me for the last 6 years, where it is literally how our business operates and why our companies are successful, that was the light bulb for me that mentorship matters, and it matters a lot.
How did it happen? Where did the insight come from? Was it a book? Is there a book in your life that you have number one on the shelf? I want details.
So those are two different questions.
I come fast and furious here. You got to keep up. Let's go.
Yeah. The light bulb aha was when, I was sitting with David Cohen in the interview process to take this job. He was talking about mentorship, and he described to me what I just described to you. That was my first is that really a thing? And then taking the job and watching, we have 150 plus mentors in Austin that come in and help the companies, and watching it in action, watching them just literally come and give their knowledge and give assistance and roll up their sleeves and have zero expectation and have these relationships that have formed that last years. That was, for me, the conscious moment. The unconscious moment was really probably, I've had a lot of mentors. Now, when I look back, my wrestling coach was a mentor in a lot of ways. But professionally, Jake Weinbaum, who is the CEO and founder of business.com, did that for me. He never called himself a mentor. I didn't look at him as a mentor, but he really took me under his wing and said, I'm going to help you figure out how to do this, even though I know that you're completely not qualified to do the thing I'm asking you to do.
Then that's an interesting thought. I understand why you just said it. He's going to give you this responsibility, but you're not qualified. Why would he do that? He did that for a reason.
In his case, I think he's exceptional. I guess I'm patting myself on the back a little bit here, but he's exceptional in identifying people's talents before they identify him. I think he's done this a lot. He saw a drive and a work ethic in me and a desire to be successful, said, you'll learn the rest. He probably figured I was intuitive or decently smart and figured out the things you don't know you can learn, and the things that you have aren't teachable, but you have them.
What about a book? Give me some books. Besides your book, we're going to make sure everybody buys that, but who from afar has inspired you and influenced you?
The very first business book that I ever read, and I don't know if this is going to be an unpopular answer, but was Jack Welch's first book. The title is escaping me right now. I was a punky kid just moving to San Francisco, was working for a .com, a successful .com, and reading this book and realizing that it wasn't as complicated as I thought it was from afar, that really it was about rolling up your sleeves, doing the hard work, and learning. And I don't know that he actually ever used the word learning in the book, but that was one of my takeaways. You have a lot to learn, go learn it, roll up your sleeves, and don't be afraid to do the hard work.
So one is not a book, but some learning from afar. An investor named Michael Deering, who talks in very similar terms that we do today around how do you de-risk a business in chunks? What are those key elements of understanding the business as a whole? Right? How do you break down a business into its independent parts and then understand what those variables are that fit those parts? And he's got some actually really great content that I've consumed over the years and a big fan of. That's pretty accessible too. He's got little videos that are a part of the shop that he invests out of called Harrison Metal. There's an older book as well. If we're just talking business books that sort of are right in line in this. I'm a studier. I love reading. I was a writer before I got into the work of building companies. So I could probably talk about books all day long. There's another one called Getting to Plan B by John Mullins and Randy Komisar, which isn't talked about a lot, but I think is actually some of the earlier versions of what we all know of today as lean startup, the build, test, learn methodology. I think these guys were some of the original thinking around this. Understanding everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the face. Let's go out and identify what are the things that we actually need to go test in the world. Once we've learned that we're wrong, we'll adjust from there and we'll build on what we have.
I still look back to, gosh, how old was I? So 1995, Netscape goes public in the summer. So I would have been 25 years old, I think. That was it. That was D-Day. I was like, man, okay, this is game on. This is just it. I always thought to myself at that moment in time, and I was in Northern Virginia at the time near Dulles Airport, which has become another kind of tech hub. I remember thinking to myself, oh my God, all these buildings, they're all going to go away. This can be remote, everything. And this is like in the mid 90s, I'm thinking this. Then of course they just built more and more and more. Now we're finally getting to a remote standpoint, but I think it's really interesting. I don't know if young people, I mean, obviously you guys are dealing with young people that have it, but I feel lucky to have that moment in the mid 1990s to be there in my 20s when it just hit, because it was so motivating. I was like, game on, website up, let's go.
One of the things I love about this work is that level of energy and excitement that you can get from being around people who feel like they're in the moment. I joke sometimes when South by Southwest comes to town in Austin, which hopefully will come back sometime soon in the ways that it has been, but you could just look around the city when it happens and find any random person walking down the street, and you can see it in their eyes that they're having, in their eyes, the best day of their life. You can see that they're just about to make it. And that seems to be the kind of energy that's just surrounding you. And there's something a little tragic about that to our earlier point around the likelihood of success. But there's also something deeply inspiring.
It's one of the reasons I'm in Saigon. It's a youthful population, and there's that same kind of enthusiasm. So you just want to be around people like that. Probably very similar in Austin. One last thought here, and we've gone around where I'm going to take you, where I'm going to ask you in a second, but the founder archetype. Okay, you've got 100 founders. You guys can imagine 100 different founders. Maybe you don't remember all their names, but you know roughly who they are. Is there a particular degree? Is there a particular anything? What is it? Is it a particular age? What are we looking at? Or is it just all over the map? Let's start with degree first.
Trevor and I have had this conversation, I mean, I want to say 50, 100 or more times, because our job is to pick companies, and we are looking at early stage companies all the time. So much so that I've resolved, and I think Trevor's similar, when I'm investing in companies via Techstars, I don't even really care what the company does until the third or fourth meeting, because I'm putting all of my effort into learning about the founder. But when it comes to degree, I'll say this, there isn't one or two things. I think it's a combination of a lot of things that come together. Look, I'm an English degree. There's nothing that says I should be an entrepreneur. And one of my favorite founders I've ever worked with was a CPA. One of my favorite founders was a lawyer that decided never to practice. To answer your question around degree a little differently, I think the thing that I have started to pay very close attention to is, do they have some form of professional degree or not is okay. How did they approach the discipline around the subject matter that they are most excited about prior to coming here?
You're looking for a pattern of some sort.
Yeah, maybe they didn't graduate, but they were a guitar player. When you ask them about what they did to become a guitar player or a musician beforehand, they describe the discipline and work ethic that they used to get to the point where they were. To me, that's more important. So yeah, I don't really care if you have a degree from a good university, a bad university, or no degree. But when I talk to you about the person that you are, how do you describe the effort that you put in and the discipline that you put into the things that matter to you? And then do I think that this thing that you're doing really matters to you?
How good have you gotten at spotting these people?
Oh, gosh. Ask me in 7 to 10 years. But I feel like we're getting better every year. Every year we make a couple of mistakes, 100%. And it's not an exact science yet. I think we can get there over time, but it's not yet. But really, the answer is ask me in 7 to 10 years, because when I'm investing in these founders, my expectation is it's going to take them 10 years to build the thing that they're building. And I don't mean $1 billion company. Like, my expectation is it's going to take 10 years to build a profitable company that's meaningful and making a meaningful impact. And if it happens faster, great, I'm ahead of the curve.
One last thought, and I guess we're a couple years, I think almost 2 years beyond it now. The very famous company that did not go IPO, summer of 19, was it? The guy with the long hair, the curly hair that was going to change the world. We were all going to work in an office together playing foosball all day long. And Korean Japanese investor at SoftBank believed all this. And everyone just, how much did that have an effect on the industry at all? Or is it just in the rearview mirror now?
I think it had a positive effect on the industry to a degree in that it helps to shed light on the importance of being honest and positive business fundamentals. I also think it's largely in the rear view mirror now. People forgot that it happened, but there's still 6 or 7 WeWorks in Austin. And even though they're not fully occupied now, I think the expectation is they'll be fully occupied again. Similar to the stuff with Theranos. Yeah, people remember it. They say they're being cautious of it, but then you get excited about people or business or whatever, and you forget really quickly.
Maybe I'll add just 2 cents here, which is to bring us back to the beginning of this conversation, which is if you look at the fundamental dynamics broadly, there's still a lot of capital, and that capital is seeking return, sometimes in ways that are not as educated or sophisticated as this market demands, right? We're just in a really unpredictable, uncertain, chaotic part of the world, of the investing world, which is early stage companies. As long as there's lots of money that's seeking return, I'm not sure that we'll learn too many lessons to keep that money from taking those risks.
I guess maybe at someone's stage when you're one of the wealthiest folks in the world, maybe WeWork was just a drop in the bucket. I mean, and it's just that one lost, and there's plenty of others to go around. I think on the scale of WeWork was pretty amazing, though, for that to go south. But listen, I could probably keep picking you guys forever. Is there anything today that I didn't bring up that you really want to remind folks? I'm going to make sure people go pick up the book and everything. But is there something at the tip of your mind that you guys sit around and discuss that I was not astute enough to ask about today?
Maybe we both have something. I'm going to jump in, and it has nothing to do with your astuteness at all.
Could be. I mean, I could,
Yeah, I would say regardless of whether you pick up the book or not, if you're out there and you want to build a business or you want to invest in an early stage business, but maybe this is really focused more on the entrepreneur, it's great to aspire to be $1 billion company. Or more importantly, it's great to aspire to reach your total addressable market and let the value of your company be dictated by that. Don't forget that it is really important to focus on fundamentals early on. The longer you push that out, the greater chance that you will not be successful because you just won't understand your business. We try to give a framework for that with our book, but really the bigger message that Trevor and I care about, myself for sure, is we just want founders, if they're going to go out and take this really hard, crazy path, like we just want you to have the best chance to be successful because this is freaking hard work. It's a chunk of your life. Your life is never going to be the same. You lose friends and family because you're so focused on your work. So take the time to focus on the important fundamentals so that you can set yourself up for success.
Yeah, can't say it any better.
The book, Levers or Levers, depending on how people want to pronounce it. The framework for building repeatability into your business. Look, I did not take you guys through a line by line, and people are going to need to go check the book out and really dive into the framework. A little bit of understanding there, but I wanted to kind of just give people a broad overview and get into some nitty gritty on some things. So I appreciate you coming on, giving me some insights.
This was fun. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, really enjoyed the conversation a lot and very glad that it meandered quite a bit all over the place. It was really exciting to talk about lots of stuff.
Hey, where can we send people? Where do you guys want to direct people to? Beyond Amazon to buy the book and all that kind of fun stuff, where would you like them to go if they want to come land on your doorstep? Do you want to give your home address so all these budding entrepreneurs can come to your house and sleep on your couch?
Absolutely. If you go to leversbook.com, you can learn more about us. You can learn more about the book. You can get in touch with us. And we also, Trevor and I, have a business where we actually hands-on teach the process to founders. So you can learn more about that at leversbook.com as well.
Guys, thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having us, Michael. This was really fun.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash, or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.